Mission Congo: The hunt for warlords in Hell's jungle in the heart of Africa lies a place some have called the world's forgotten crisis. It's a land of staggering beauty and unimaginable wealth, but for decades, it's been a theater of unending war. This is the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a region saturated with the blood of millions, a battleground for over 100 different armies, militias, and death squads. Here, in the dense, suffocating jungle, modern geopolitics, ancient hatreds, and our insatiable global demand for precious minerals have created a perfect storm of human suffering. For years, the world sent peacekeepers, signed treaties, and issued condemnations. But the killing never really stopped. Then, in the first weeks of 2025, that storm broke. A sophisticated rebel army, allegedly backed by a powerful neighboring state, launched a blitzkrieg offensive that would bring a major city to its knees. At the same time, a shadowy jihadist cult aligned with the Islamic State escalated its own campaign of pure terror, preying on anyone who escaped the bombs and bullets. The international response, a coalition of regional armies, was about to face its ultimate test. This isn't a clean, simple story of a single special forces operation. This is the brutal, chaotic, and true story of the battle for Congo itself. The story of a mission to hunt warlords in a jungle that had truly become a living hell. On the night of January 26, 2025, the city of Goma held its breath. For weeks, the wolves had been at the door. Now, they were breaking it down. Under the cover of darkness, columns of disciplined, heavily armed soldiers began to infiltrate the city's perimeter. These weren't undisciplined thugs. This was an army. This was the March 23rd movement, better known as M23, and they had come to conquer Hell's jungle. The world was about to witness the fall of a city and the catastrophic failure of a generation of peacekeeping. To understand the firestorm of early 2025, you first have to understand the anatomy of the dragon terrorizing the Congo. It's a beast with many heads, but two, in particular, had grown terrifyingly powerful, feeding on the chaos and the riches buried just beneath the soil. The first, and most formidable head, is the March 23rd movement, or M23. Calling them a mere rebel group is a dangerous understatement. M23 operates with the precision, discipline, and equipment of a modern, professional army. They field artillery, employ sophisticated tactics, and maintain a rigid command structure. Their military commander is the notorious Sultani Makenga, a man who has been fighting in Congo's wars since he was a teenager. Makenga is sanctioned by the United Nations and the United States for a laundry list of atrocities, including the extensive use of child soldiers and campaigns of extreme violence against civilians. The UN has stated many of his commanders have appalling track records, placing them among the worst perpetrators of human rights violations in the world. M23 claims it's fighting to protect the ethnic Tutsi minority in eastern Congo, a narrative born from the complex aftermath of the 1994 Rwandan genocide. However, UN experts and the Congolese government have long accused neighboring Rwanda of using M23 as a proxy force. The alleged objective is to control and exploit the DRC's vast mineral wealth, the cobalt, copper, and coltan that power our smartphones and electric cars. This isn't just a rebellion, it's a high-stakes geopolitical power play. They had done this before, briefly capturing Goma in 2012 before international pressure forced a withdrawal. For over a decade, Makenga and his forces waited, rearming and retraining for the day they would return. By late 2024, that day had arrived. The second head of the dragon is a different kind of evil, one motivated not by state-sponsored ambition, but by a twisted global ideology. This is the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF. Originally a Ugandan rebel group, the ADF has metastasized in the Congolese jungle. Led by the shadowy Sika Musa Baluku, the group pledged allegiance to the Islamic State in 2019, rebranding itself as the Islamic State Central Africa Province, or ISCAP. Since then, they have become one of ISIS's most violent and active global affiliates. While M23 fights for territory, the ADF fights for terror itself. Their currency is fear, their tactics are butchery. They specialize in mass casualty attacks on soft targets, villages, markets, and churches. Their fighters are known for using machetes and burning victims alive. They don't seek to govern, they seek to cleanse the land of those they deem infidels. Their campaign of sectarian violence, primarily targeting Christian communities, has created a layer of horror separate from, but intertwined with, the M23 insurgency. And these are just the two most dominant threats. Lurking in their shadows are over 130 other armed groups, a chaotic ecosystem of local militias, criminal gangs, and self-defense forces known as Mai. Some fight for their tribes, some for control of a single mine, and others are little more than bandits. This brutal landscape is where the international community decided to draw a line in the sand. Standing against this tidal wave of violence was a fractured and desperate coalition of defenders. The first line was the Armed Forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the FARDC. On paper, they're a national army. In reality, they're a force plagued by decades of corruption, poor equipment, and inconsistent leadership. Yet, for all their faults, they were Congolese soldiers fighting for their own soil, the last uniformed barrier between the warlords and their people. Bolstering them was MONUSCO, the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the DRC. At its peak, it was one of the largest and most expensive peacekeeping missions in UN history. But by 2025, MONUSCO was in a state of managed retreat. Facing immense political pressure from the Congolese government and a population frustrated with its perceived failures, the mission was in the process of a phased withdrawal. Its mandate was reduced, its bases were closing, and its forces were stretched thin. The blue helmets were still on the ground, but they were a shadow of their former strength, tasked with protecting civilians while packing their bags. Into this vacuum stepped a new force. In December 2023, the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, deployed its own mission, SAMIDRC. Comprised of soldiers from South Africa, Tanzania, and Malawi, this was not a traditional peacekeeping force. SAMIDRC was deployed with a robust mandate to conduct offensive operations, with the stated goal of supporting the FARDC in fighting and eradicating the M23 and other armed groups. This was the force meant to change the game. They brought heavy equipment, attack helicopters, and the political will of an entire region. South Africa alone committed nearly 3,000 troops, a clear signal of the mission's gravity. They were the cavalry, arriving with a mandate to do what MONUSCO never could, take the fight directly to the enemy. And behind them all, in the shadows, was the unseen hand of Western Special Operations. While no country would officially admit to having boots on the ground in a direct combat role, the signs of their involvement were there. Sophisticated intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms monitored warlord movements. Encrypted communications passed between allied commanders. And elite trainers worked with FARDC and SAMIDRC units, honing their skills for the unforgiving jungle. These operators provided a critical technological and tactical edge, a force multiplier for the conventional armies preparing for the fight of their lives. Section 3, The Gathering Storm. The final weeks of 2024 were defined by a fatal illusion of calm. A fragile ceasefire existed only on paper. On the ground, the gears of war were grinding. The ceasefire collapsed in December 2024 after M23 launched a series of probing attacks north and west of Goma, deliberately testing defenses and seizing key terrain. Intelligence reports painted an alarming picture. M23 wasn't just attacking, it was maneuvering, flowing through the jungle to cut off supply lines and encircle government positions. They swiftly captured key towns and pushed deep into surrounding territories, threatening the main arteries into Goma. For the coalition defenders, it was an impossible strategic dilemma. Their primary mission was to confront M23, which meant concentrating their best units, the battle-hardened South Africans and Tanzanians of SAMIDRC, around Goma. But this created a dangerous vacuum elsewhere. As FARDC and SAMIDRC forces shifted to the M23 threat, they pulled troops from areas where the ADF operated. The jihadists immediately exploited it. While the world watched the M23 advance, the ADF went on a killing spree. Reports emerged of massacres going unanswered in remote villages. Intelligence even suggested that M23 had sought a non-aggression pact with the ADF for safe passage, but the ADF's leader, Musa Buluku, reportedly refused, committed to killing all he deemed infidels. The defenders were caught in a deadly trap. Defend against the conventional army and let the terrorists run rampant, or disperse to hunt the terrorists and leave the city vulnerable. By mid-January 2025, Goma, a sprawling city home to over 1 million people and hundreds of thousands of displaced persons crammed into overflowing camps, was effectively surrounded. The main roads were controlled by M23. Food and supplies slowed to a trickle. Fear hung over the city. The displaced people in the camps on the city's outskirts could hear the crump of mortars and the rattle of heavy machine guns drawing closer each night. They had fled war once, and now war was coming for them again. Section 4, The Fall of Goma. The lightning struck on January 23, 2025, with intense clashes on the western edge of Goma. M23 forces, using coordinated artillery and infantry assaults, smashed into defensive lines. The buffer zone that had protected Goma was vaporized in hours. For the hundreds of thousands of displaced people in camps near the front lines, it was the apocalypse. Heavy shelling struck perilously close to the sprawling settlements of tarpaulin and mud. Panic erupted. Families fled again, this time into the heart of Goma itself, a wave of human misery flooding the streets. Days of brutal, chaotic urban warfare followed. The FARDC and allied militias fought back with courage but were outmaneuvered. On January 27, as M23 fighters pushed deeper, they assaulted the infamous Munzen's prison. A mass jailbreak occurred, and in the ensuing pandemonium, prisoners set fire to large parts of the facility. In the chaos, UN officials later reported that hundreds of female inmates were raped and burned alive. The Samudruk force was thrown into the meat grinder. South African and Tanzanian troops engaged in heavy firefights but faced an enemy better prepared for this battle. M23 was armed with sophisticated weaponry, limiting the effectiveness of air support. They knew the terrain and had the initiative. In the fierce clashes, Samudruk suffered significant casualties. At least 14 South African soldiers, 3 Malawians, and 2 Tanzanians were killed. They were overrun. The city's infrastructure collapsed. By the last days of January, the defense of Goma had become untenable. The FARDC was in a disorganized retreat. On February 5, 2025, the city officially fell. Sultani Makenga had done it again. As M23 soldiers consolidated control, an eerie calm settled over Goma, the guns replaced by the reality of occupation. The UN would later estimate that in the battle for the city, between 900 and 3,000 people were killed, with nearly 2,900 more injured. The hunt for the warlords had failed. The warlords had captured the jungle. Section 5, The Fractured Aftermath. The fall of Goma sent shockwaves across the region. The immediate result was a humanitarian catastrophe. The fighting had displaced over 700,000 people in and around the city in January alone. After taking Goma, M23 continued its advance south, capturing the strategic city of Bukavu on February 16, 2025, sending a new flood of refugees toward the Burundian border. An aid worker described Goma as a veritable center of human despair. As the disaster unfolded, diplomats scrambled. A frantic, two-track process began. In Washington, D.C., the U.S. administration brokered talks between the presidents of the DRC and Rwanda, culminating in a peace agreement on June 27, 2025. The deal aimed to address Rwanda's alleged support for M23, including timelines for withdrawal. Simultaneously, Qatar sponsored direct talks in Doha between the Congolese government and M23 rebels. In July, they signed a Declaration of Principles, agreeing to finalize a full peace deal by August 18. But handshakes in foreign capitals meant little in the jungles of Kivu. The August deadline passed with no agreement. Ceasefires were announced and immediately violated. Perhaps the most telling consequence was the fate of Samudruk. The mission had been militarily defeated. Surrounded and having suffered unacceptable losses, the SADC coalition had no choice. On March 13, 2025, SADC formally terminated the mission's mandate. The withdrawal began in late April. In a final, humbling chapter, convoys of retreating South African, Tanzanian, and Malawian troops were escorted out of the DRC by road through Rwanda, the very nation accused of sponsoring the rebels that had defeated them. Experts were blunt: this was a military retreat, a stark lesson in the limits of foreign intervention against a well-supported proxy force. The fall of Goma was more than just a battle, it was a symptom of a deep disease. The conflict in eastern Congo has never been a simple civil war. It's a multi-layered proxy battleground, a resource war fought by regional powers through local militias. The immense wealth under the ground has become a curse, fueling a cycle of violence where armed groups act as brutal mining corporations, extracting wealth for foreign patrons. M23's victory wasn't just for a rebel group, it was a hostile corporate takeover executed with military force. One of the most dangerous consequences of the Goma campaign happened in the shadows. As the world focused on M23, the Islamic State affiliate, ADF, was given free rein. the security vacuum allowed them to operate with near-total impunity. According to data from ACLED, civilian fatalities from ADF attacks surged by 68% in the first quarter of 2025, making it the group's second deadliest quarter for civilian targeting on record. While coalition forces were being routed by one warlord, another was flourishing. In one attack on February 11, the ADF was responsible for the mass killing of 70 people at a church. This is the tragic calculus of the Congo War: plugging one hole in the dam only causes the water to burst through another. As of September 2025, the situation remains profoundly fragile. Peace agreements signed in Washington have not translated into peace in Congo. M23 still controls vast swathes of territory. Their leader, Sultani Makenga, remains at large, a triumphant warlord. The ADF continues its campaign of terror. The international peacekeepers of Samudruk have withdrawn, and the UN's MONUSCO mission is in the process of drawing down, though it still maintains a presence and its mandate was extended to December 2025. The hunt for the warlords of Congo's hellish jungle was predicated on the idea that military force could impose peace. The fall of Goma proved that in this complex, resource-fueled conflict, guns alone are not the answer. Without a genuine will to address the root causes, foreign meddling, the corrupt resource trade, and impunity for atrocities, any military mission is doomed. The international community sent its soldiers to hunt the dragon, but they failed to see that for every head they targeted, another was growing stronger in the darkness. The mission isn't over. For the millions of people in the eastern Congo, the hunt has just been postponed, and their unending war rages on. The conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the most complex and tragic of our time. What are your thoughts on the role of international forces and the challenges of peacekeeping in such an environment? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about the world's most critical conflicts, make sure to subscribe. The battle for Goma in 2025 was a brutal lesson in modern warfare. It showed how proxy armies, backed by state actors and fueled by resource competition, can overwhelm traditional peacekeeping forces. The mission to contain the warlords of Congo didn't end in victory. It ended in a tactical defeat and a strategic stalemate, leaving M23 entrenched and the brutal ADF empowered. The story of Mission Congo is a somber reminder that in a world of complex geopolitics, the line between hero and villain, and between peacekeeper and pawn, is often buried in the mud of a forgotten war. The hunt continues, not for a clean victory, but for a fragile, elusive peace.